So I titled my talk Swiss Coloniality, Unearthing its Invisibilities, tracing a fragmented visual and material history of Swiss coloniality between Switzerland and Brazil. So what you hear today, or actually it's a very small insight into my doctoral thesis, which I'm conducting at EPFL at the moment. So previously, before being a doctoral student, I had, let's say, classical artistic practice, which I still have today, but I'm kind of seeing how I can expand it into academic work. So basically, I'm revisiting also some of my own artistic projects on a more academic methodology. So somehow I'm always switching between one and the other, although I kind of see it also as one thing. So I am gonna also provide you with some references that are important to me. And I would like to start with one talking about invisibilities and also making visible this often denied participation of Switzerland in the colonial project of, let's say, more European, bigger imperial powers. A quote of Avery Gordon, a sociologist, who says, "Invisible things are not necessarily not there." This seems kind of a logic thing, but it has become a very guiding methodology to make visible what might be quite invisible or has been invisibilized actively also during many decades through Swiss politics and so on. You see here a photograph I took in 2017 in Brazil, in the state, in the southern part of Bahia. It's a Quilombo village, a community that is based on descendants from Afro-Brazilian enslaved people from the 19th century, a colony that was at the time actually a plantation specifically that was called Helvetia. It was, as you can imagine, owned by some Swiss people. Basically, you can imagine this whole colony in the 19th century as being a conglomerate of around 20 different plantations, mostly coffee plantations, that were owned by Swiss people, also some Germans. And surprisingly, many of them have been owned by Neuchâtel families. So Neuchâtel is indeed a very important location when trying to trace this Swiss colonial entanglements. So I'm sorry also to kind of attack you with some text, but I think as it might be useful for some of you, and it also gives more in-depth in the way I'm working. So when I first visited Helvetia in 2017, on the invitation of a Brazilian curator, Marcelo Resende, who works now in Germany, I was somehow confronted with a narrative that he heard from some white Brazilian people that were descendants of colonialists from the same colony, that Helvetia was somehow a better colony, a better slavery-based colony than other ones. So somehow the Swiss apparently would have been better colonizers, nicer colonizers than maybe, for example, the Portuguese. I was really struck with this in 2017. As you can imagine, 2017 was not really the moment when many people in Switzerland publicly talked about colonialism. Obviously, this has been done since decades, as also Alice pointed out really nicely. These are kind of waves sometimes when these topics come to the public and then somehow sadly also disappear again with maybe sometimes not that much action. So how could I, when I visited this place, somehow tackle this kind of narrative of, again, you know, the Swiss being sometimes seen globally as, you know, this kind of people with the white West, being neutral, never having participated in anything bad happening in the world. So how could we somehow revisit this place, which very obviously was linked to a colonial project? And teacher Demos, art historian who wrote this book, Return to the Post-Colony Specters of Colonialism in Contemporary Art, already an old book, 10 years old, wrote that the spectral, so again, the ghostly, the haunting, the spectral, a term I use to address the haunting memories and ghostly presence that refuse to rest in peace and cannot be situated firmly within representation. So coming from the visual arts, how do we represent something that is haunted, that is more maybe in the ghostly sphere, because it lays maybe in the past and its visual traces are lost. So the spectral focuses our attention on the aesthetic aspect of the problem, whereby beings and presences enter uneasily into or insistently disturb representation and the stability of its visual, temporal, and spatial logic. So how I worked in Helvetia, I think I would like to share with you a very small excerpt of a video that I did there. So I'm trying now to stop the sharing and share it again on, yep, okay. Just shifting to the right place, okay. So let me see, I think I have to flick when I do this to give the tone, yeah, okay. So I'm trying now to share the video. Where is it now? I'm sorry, somehow. Because I'm already in full screen here. Okay. I know there's a place I have to cross to make exactly. So I think now it should work. Can you see the video?
Yes.
Okay. So let me know if you hear the voice. There is also subtitles as it is in Brazilian Portuguese, but it's really nice to hear the sound in this case. So I'm showing you kind of the approach that developed also in collaboration with the inhabitants of Helvetia, that I basically followed some of the inhabitants to places of memory that is inscribed, again, not in official archives, not on paper, but in their oral memory, also transgenerational memory. So I was also, as a doctoral student in architecture and landscape, quite interested in how these memories were linked to the landscape of this area. And I would like you to put a focus on that, you know, how also compared with what you can actually see, you know, what is visible of this often violent memory of the colonial times in Helvetia. I'm starting now. It's going to be a very short excerpt and we're going to talk about it later. Can you hear it? It's maybe still, yeah.
Para mostrar aonde eu não sei se é verdade ou mentira. Eu não sei se é verdade ou mentira, aonde eles têm um porão que prendia os escravos, que era 3 pau formato, né? Aí um por cima e os 2. Aí com as argolas, do jeito que onde eles botavam ainda os escravos, porque os escravos ficavam nessa posição, né? Ainda, eu andava estilingando aí mais os mineiros, aí nós faltava quem aí? Eu disse, rapaz, isso é onde os escravos apanhavam aí. Olha. Mas diz eles que era o porão. Agora, porque esse buraco aí é quando os escravos que eram torturados, depois que torturava, eles prendiam aqui, às vezes falhava até a hora de comer, assim contra meus avós, né? E ficava sem comer, passava o dia com castigo.
Okay, as we don't have that much time, have to leave you with a really short excerpt and go back to my presentation. Okay. This was a short excerpt of one of these videos that I had the chance to make together with the community of Helvetia. And for me, it's always very striking that what you actually see in this landscape is kind of a hole in the grass outside a little bit of the village, or when this man talked how the tronco, that is the place where slaves were bound to be tortured, it's just kind of a little patch of, you know, palm trees. So basically, what me as a complete outsider also to this cultural context, I haven't been able to see anything specific. You know, I didn't see a monument. I didn't see even like an architectural, you know, structure or something. All I could see was basically, you know, a hole in the grass. So I got very interested in this idea of traces and visibility of Swiss colonialism. What you see here is a screenshot of still of a later part of the video, where they guided me to this specific tree. It's a fruit tree, and for them, it took them like 14 minutes, 15 minutes to drive outside of the village and bring me to that specific tree. And they said, this is where the slave owner's house was. And it was very somehow taken, I was very taken by the fact that for them, this tree somehow becomes the monuments, you know, and yeah, so I would at this point like to give you another reference of an anthropologist that you, I guess, all know, Michael Tausig, that says, the tongue remembers what you do not. Life moves on while all around you lie the traces of lost eras. So in somehow this search for these traces of the lost eras, to make also a point in kind of proving, you know, this entanglement of Swiss colonialism, I not only visited this place, but also, of course, I did a lot of real archival research, if you want so, in the traditional sense. And I'm reading to you now a short excerpt of how then this colonization happens of an entrepreneur. So this is a book by a German doctor who himself had a coffee plantation, and he wrote a short book, which is one of the only written traces that we have of that time. So he's saying, the colonists drove another day journey up to the river into the jungle. Here, the land began to become hilly, consisted of good yellow and fat loam soil mixed with black vegetable soil, and was irrigated by beautiful streams. They therefore, have to move this thing here. They therefore found the same in every respect suitable for their purpose, turned to the government and received 5 Cismarias jungle. We will see what a Cismaria is. They called their settlement Leopoldina for the Empress Leopoldina, who had contributed so much to the bestowal of the land. These are maps that I found on the digital archives of the National Archives of Brazil in Rio de Janeiro. This is basically how the land, which was, of course, indigenous land of several groups that inhabited these forests at the coast of Brazil at the time, were distributed, let's say redistributed under force to European settler colonialists. You can see here 3 names that received this specific land. This is a map from the 1830s to Borel, Begois, and Huguenot. these are exactly 3 Neuchâtel families that received at the time some land, which they then could treat to build up their colonies. You see here another map of the same process where it is written Helvetia, a name still inscribed today, as you saw. So as I'm coming from visual culture, I'm very much interested, of course, even more to written testimonies by visual testimonies. And there is not much from this very specific one, but we have one watercolor painting that was also done by a Neuchâtel painter, Bossé de Luz, who his uncle had one of the colony, was one of the coffee planters at the time. I cut the image here into 2 because I would like you to look at this very clear frontier between what has been before, you know, the indigenous forests of the Mata Atlântica, the rainforest of the coast in Brazil, which is one of the most biodiverse forests in the world. Today, it exists only by 4% of what has been previously existing. And how did this cut into this environment happen? So, I'm first going to this one. We are now looking at the second part, the below part of the drawing, which basically shows us almost like a movie how these colonies were set into places. I don't know if you see my hand here on the image. In the middle, we have a section where you can see fallen trees. So the first thing these colonialists, when arriving and having been dedicated some specific lands by the government of Brazil at the time, they had to, of course, clear it, right? They had to somehow get rid of this huge forest, which is a really difficult and very dangerous work, which of course they haven't done by themselves, but often through enslaved indigenous people, they cleared these forests. We have also very clear testimonies of this process, which is a very brutal one. So we are not only talking about African enslavement, but also indigenous enslavement of the people inhabiting these forests before, and having been also displaced, obviously, by this process of the plantation, setting up of the plantations. So this is basically the first part, and then you know, they started to plant the coffee trees. So we have this very clear contrast between a multi-diverse forest and the monoculture, which is like one plant in a geometrically aligned setups for maximum profit, obviously.
Denise, yes? Sorry, do you have an original image, like when we can see like both parts on it?
Yes.
This one. Yeah, okay. Oh yeah, yeah.
I'm just not finished with this one, but it will come.
Yeah, great.
Because it helps somehow to see the divide between these two spaces.
For sure. Thank you.
So, but yeah, we can also look at this one together. So what you see in the space of the plantation, which is also, you know, somehow even enclosed by these forests, which were very difficult to pass, at least for Europeans. We see several workers. All of them basically are black, so there's not one white person on this image. We will also see later why this might be, but this Neuchâtel painter decided to only, you know, depict the workers who either, you know, drive a canoe down with maybe some of the produce to the nearby sea, or, you know, carrying other things. I even have and this is very special, I have the draft of this painting, which is really, of this drawing, which is great because it gives us even more indications on what this painter from Neuchâtel wanted to say. So I don't have the time to go into this, but I thought it's a really interesting kind of visual representation where you see he colored the plantation but not the forest, or just a little bit. But then it's this kind of dark space, you know, between the trees. And I think it really stands as a symbol of this clear divide of these first colonialists, and that cut into this ecosystem, which is obviously also, kind of the beginning of the disaster that we are in today. So, and this disaster we are in today, to call it a bit blankly, is that today at this very same spot, we do not have coffee plantations anymore, but in the wake of the 20th century, at some point, these lands have been transformed into eucalyptus plantations. These eucalyptus plantations are owned by a multinational that is, again, for Europe, placed in Switzerland. It's called Suzano. So I'm kind of, in my research, in this territorial research of making this Swiss colonialism visible, I'm not only interested in the historical part of it, but also this kind of longue durée, the long kind of, you know, if we put time and space into one pot and kind of try to read it in one line, what are the similarities and what has actually stayed the same over this long time and what not. So, but one part of my research is also really touching on this new plantation project, which is done by these multinationals. They are producing a lot of harm because these eucalyptus plantations are really sucking out everything from the floor, from the soil. It's a really disastrous, basically, project when we speak of ecological the ecological damage that is done to the soil, but not only to the soil, but also to the communities that are living in these areas. So Helvetia, that we have seen before, is one of the only communities that is at the moment still surviving, surrounded by these, again, monoculture plantations. They are under huge pressure from these companies, because they try to buy the land of these people and to basically make a continuous plantation. So the pressure in this kind of more neo-colonial context is still very high for these communities. We are now switching to an exhibition view. This is in the Aargauer Kunsthaus in 2020, in the very beginning of 2020, where I was able to show this project. You see the video that I saw before is actually a 3-screen video, which is taking around 20 minutes. And there's also testimonials from people in Helvetia that talk about this memory of Swiss colonialism. For me, I have kind of this is more now maybe a methodology, but I don't like to depict people from these communities just as images. For me, they always should be able to talk, at least, you know. So I'm not often working with photography, but I really prefer to work with film, where we can hear their voices. I know this is it's a huge topic when we talk about the power of the voice and who has the voice and so on. But yeah, just to share like one small thing that I think is still a minimum to do for me. And yeah, when we talk of Swiss colonialism, as you might have read some of Patrizia Pocher's text that I assigned for today, what this specific case is really showing is that this was not just a project of some families that were maybe, you know, immigrating to Brazil, starting these colonies and becoming very rich. You see some of these lists of the different names of the plantations in Colonia Leopoldina. Here you have Helvetia as the one still, you know, that's as a name still exists today. And then you have how many white people lived on the colony and how many enslaved.
Escravos.
So the proportion was around 1 to 10. So for one white person, you had around 10 enslaved people. These documents I found in the Swiss National Archives also in 2017. And what was striking for me is basically that the Swiss state has on the colony already in the 1830s put a consular agency on the colony. So basically it was for this very young state, Switzerland, which was actually having their own constitution only in 1848, it was a very early kind of colonial presence of the young state Switzerland as it exists today. So for me, you see a stamp of that here. So when looking at the archives, you know, and maybe now going a little bit more into also this notion of the archive, how do I read these archives? That, you know, I have a historical work, but on the same time, I'm still coming from this, the visuality and also the materiality of archives. So how can we look at them in another way? And yeah, I find this short quote of Saidiya Hartman that you, I'm sure all know also, as well, of her short essay called Venus in Two Acts, where she says, we deal with the history of an unrecoverable past. I really agree with this, you know. I mean, we can restitute, we can do a lot, but a big part of it is also unrecoverable. We deal with the history of an unrecoverable past. It is a narrative of what might have been or could have been. It is a history written with, but also against the archives. Because as we are all sensitized, I think much more than I was already also in 2017, of course, the official archives, as we see here, 2 books that I photographed in the Swiss National Archives of the Swiss presence, the state presence in Bahia in Brazil. We are kind of dealing with a broken past. You know, we are dealing with papers that are eaten up, that have been maybe you know, broken down. So what can we take from these kind of traditional archives that are also completely are often very silent, obviously, of their enslaved people, but also of the indigenous communities that have been erased literally through the plantation system in Brazil. So how can we read these lists today? What you see here is a succession list of some of these planters that were having colonies in this Colonia Leopoldina. So once one of these guys dies, you know, they made a succession list and listed all his properties. And as it has been done, you know, you see here, for example, they wrote all his buildings, which are dedicated to the coffee production. But then, as a second group already, they listed his enslaved people. So, as it has been practiced, they were only given their first name and then their value. Or sometimes there were some really also really inhuman, you know, notes also, like defectuous or and so on. So how to deal with something like that? Also how to deal with this in an artistic maybe representation. So when I worked on this subject in 2017, from these at the very end of my stay in Brazil, in Salvador da Bahia, in the capital, I was invited to a big kind of folks party, which was the feast of the goddess Iemanjá. The goddess Iemanjá belongs to the Candomblé religion, which is basically a kind of a hybrid religion practiced by enslaved people at the time between you know, their original belief systems stemming from their African origin countries, as well as from Catholicism. So when I could join this feast, which was really all over the city and especially at the beach, I saw that people were wearing these white textiles with these embroideries, with these holes in it, called eyelet embroidery. And I got very curious because I knew this technique from Switzerland. Like, I knew that St. Gallen used to be a very high production for textiles, and my mom took me at the time to see. She kind of introduced me to this textile culture, and I got curious. How did it happen that these textiles, which I knew were kind of industrialized, the machines to produce them were industrialized in Switzerland, also in the 19th century? How did they became so popular in the Afro-Brazilian community in Brazil. And I learned that basically they were exported to Brazil as well as to other countries very extensively, as well as the machines that were invented in Switzerland. And now I'm making kind of some connections. But when I read the archives from Brazil, you see all these holes. I mean, I have like thousands of photographs of these paper documents with holes in them. And I was like, well, somehow it reminds me, to these holes that I saw in these textiles. And as I had somehow the historical links between this kind of textile culture and also this textile technology and the use of them in Brazil, I thought it might be interesting artistically to work with this technique. And I produced for this piece, basically taking some of these lists of the names of the enslaved people as I found them written in the archives, as well as other statements which talk about, the way the plantation was run, as well as these stamps, which really prove for me the Swiss state involvement in these colonial projects. And I created this very subtle textile works which you have to also look at from close by. This is maybe a bit more interesting for the artists in the group, because it's also like how do you do all this historical research, but then how do you transform it into artistic works? That was a short insight into that, and we are now from this work going back again to another visual representation, which is a map that I also found in the National Archives in Brazil, where you can see the seaside, the Atlantic, and Bahia, the Bahian coast. And here you see the Colonia dos Suizos. I was really happy to find this map, because it shows, again, how important it was for these colonies to be set up at the side of the river, which connected them with the sea, which obviously was the way also their coffee could be shipped to the world trade. But at the same time, you can see some of the indigenous groups that inhabit these areas. And we really know today that it was, this setting up of these colonies was done in a period when there was a declared war against the indigenous peoples in Brazil. So the state of Brazil at the time gave these first colonialists, and as well as to the colonial military, really the right to enslave indigenous people, but also to treat them with violence once they would resist. Many of them have been killed also through diseases that the Europeans brought, and so on. This is also a topic by itself. But what looks here as kind of a neutral map has been basically a war zone. We are now going back to Neuchâtel, because at a specific time in my work, it became very important not only to look at these faraway places where colonialism apparently happened, but to really look back to my surrounding, where my legacy is from, the Swiss environment. So this is a map that has been published by the Bulletin de la Société Neuchâteloise de Géographie, so the Geographical Society of Neuchâtel. And you see here Caravelas. This is exactly where the colony was set up. This is a tiny town, and it's crazy that this is represented on a world map by them, but it is because their families have been there and it was important to them. You see it here, and then the link again to Europe. So we are now jumping with this map to Neuchâtel, to the main Musée d'Ethnographie de Neuchâtel that has already been mentioned by Alice today. So it's great to have these connections. And this is a photograph of the villa where the museum is still today placed in. I'm not going to talk about any curatorial or the collection of the museum, but about the architecture of the building itself. So this house was a private villa built by a man called James de Bury, it's not the Duperry that has gained a lot of knowledge through his statue that stands in the middle of the city of Neuchâtel and has now been recontextualized, let's say, through a big public debate in the last 2-3 years. It is basically another member of the same family. He inherited this land from his father, and by being a colonialist himself in Brazil, he was a tobacco planter. He came back to Neuchâtel with lots and lots of money. And he then decided on the land he inherited to build this villa, which is his private villa. As he didn't have any children who could inherit this villa, he gave it to the city of Neuchâtel under the condition that it would be turned into an ethnographic museum in 1904. You see here one of the first exhibitions in this. So this typology of the architectural typology of the villa that transforms into a museum, a public museum, has also been repeatedly done in not only in Switzerland, but in Europe. But I'm very interested in the material transformation of this villa, and also seeing somehow this villa as a trace, you know, today to work with, and to also reread this, not only the architecture itself, but also the institution that has then newly inhabited this villa. So when I did some, I'm still working on this, it's kind of work in progress, but I've been trying to work with some of the, you know, with how to represent this villa and kind of show its colonial legacy, not only by being an ethnographic museum, but by the money transfer that came from the slavery-based colonies, plantations. So these are photographs that I took. It's rather snapshots of some of the walls. So the tapestry is the original tapestry that is from this couple, the Duperry couple who lived in the villa, and how it has been written over by notes from maybe some curators or technicians who installed some ethnographic exhibitions in it. So yeah, I will stop here. And so I have been calling this talk also after a book that I have been co-publishing with two dear colleagues of mine, Julien Carboni and Nitin Bratla, which is a book that I highly recommend you to order it to your library or buy it. You can order it at EPFL Press. It's called Unearthing Traces, Dismantling Imperialist Entanglements of Archives, Landscapes, and the Built Environment. Basically, this came out of a conference that I co-organized in 2021 to really look at how we can reread the European built environment and landscapes, but not only the European, but really connect it back to also the places of coloniality in the global South. So it's maybe a book that might help you. It's a edited volume with some amazing authors as Holly Amber Kennedy or Françoise Vergès or Leopold Lambert, but also some other contributors. So I thought, as I'm just linking, I'm ending with this because it links back to my title. And it's also kind of really, my big question, how to unearth traces of colonialism in general, not only in the arts, but in academia. So yeah, that was it. I hope you could follow this journey, and I stopped the sharing of the screen.